Hi all, and welcome to Spamhouse's webinar, Beyond IP and Domain Reputation. My name's Sarah, and I'm delighted to have the pleasure of introducing you today to Manuele and Matt. Now, Manuele, otherwise known in the industry as Skull, has been working with email infrastructure, particularly the security aspect of email, for more years than I probably think he'd like to admit. And then we have Matthew Stith. Matt, I have to say, is probably one of the most passionate people I know when it comes to anti-abuse in terms of the internet. Following on from years of working on an anti-abuse desk for a fairly well-known hosting company, Matt's now Spamhouse's industry liaison. He works together with a multitude of people, both within the sector and within the wider business community, to really ensure that we help keep the internet a safe place. Now, just before I hand you over to Skull and Stith, I'd like to mention that we will be having a question and answer time at the end of this webinar. I've opened the Zoom question and answer window, so you can put your questions in there as and when you think of them, but we'll be answering them at the end. And that's it from me. I will now hand you over to the lovely Matthew.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So first things first, we're going to look at what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be talking about just IP and domain reputation, how the landscape is changing, how Spamhouse has done things with how we process to be able to prepare for the future, and looking at a couple of examples regarding hash elements and some examples. And then the last thing is the future, what we are planning and what we are looking at with this hash block list that we're going to be talking about today. So first, domain and IP reputation. So essentially, this is the standard for what block list providers are using out there today. And it's a very effective and efficient way of assigning a reputation to a domain or an IP and being able to publish that and distribute that out to the multitudes of people who want to consume those lists, to be able to make a decision on if they would like to block something, if they want to mark it as spam. It's really up to the customer and how they want to be able to utilize the data that is provided in block lists. But what makes these things so effective is you can use multiple techniques in how you can assign those reputational elements to the DNS elements that occur in email and in internet addresses. So there's a wide breadth of the ability to add that reputation and be able to make those decisions. And it just helps those networks be able to provide a decision. So with all of that said, this is not something that has happened in the last week, last month. This is something that we've been barreling towards for years. And it's something that Spamhouse has been looking at and has been keeping an eye on. But the main things that we're looking here and the way the industry is changing is there's been a mass consolidation in email services. Essentially, there used to be hundreds and hundreds of these providers that would offer mailboxes to people, but companies have been buying them up. Everybody's been consolidating, and now usually there's most people on this call probably have either a Gmail, an Office 365, or something along with their ISP that they have a mailbox for. So these are very large networks with a large number of legitimate users. And with that, that's just not something that any IP or domain reputational list provider would be able to block. So it's one of those changes that you have to figure out a way to protect your users from the challenges that may be coming from some of those large providers. But you can't end up blocking them or their IP space. And next on here, we're looking at cloud providers. Cloud providers, it's something where almost anybody can go to a cloud provider, be it Amazon, DigitalOcean, whoever, and they can go and spin up a server with little knowledge of some of the inner workings on how to secure something like that. So they set something up, they set up a mail server, and everything's set up and ready to go, and they haven't put any thought into how they would secure that. So there's a possibility that that could get compromised. There's also the other side where instead of being compromised, it's a fraud challenge. And what they can do is they can do this automated spin up and send out their spam, then spin down a server at one location. They could go to another hosting provider with a different IP and a different network entirely. And there's just this constant jumping around that can happen at these cloud providers, but you can't block them wholesale because there's so much more legitimate traffic than there is illegitimate traffic on these cloud providers. So it's a big challenge to figure out how you can assign something to be able to mitigate the challenges that you're going to see. Last, we're looking at file sharing services. The consolidation here is similar to what has happened with an email. There used to be a bunch of people out there that offered up these file sharing services, but now they're really being located within a few large providers out there, and people are able to do that same jumping around that you're able to do in the cloud. And these downloads from these file sharing services are immediately available, and you can change and jump and jump and jump as you need to. So it's just one of these three things that we're really seeing make it a little bit more difficult to make just having IP and domain reputation a thing that you need to be able to supplement. So, as we have been looking at this, we've had people say, what's taking you so long? And with that, I'm going to put this over to Skull, who's able to give us a little bit of information about what Spamhaus has been doing to make ourselves ready to combat this challenge. So over to you, Skull.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. Yes, I want to focus firstly on the cloud IP space that you're being referring to, because a side effect of people being able to spin up their services on a almost random IP and move it around very quickly brought to evidence some, I would say, some long-term issue that has been around for quite a while, but it just exploded in terms of volume with the cloud phenomenon. That was and still is hailstorm spam. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term, that is the definition that the industry gives to senders that basically spin up a new sending IP. They start sending spam basically with a brand new domain, and basically allowing them to start fresh, start anew with a new IP and new domain that have no previous reputation attached. Spam as much as they can for a very limited amount of time, often between 2 and 3 minutes, and then in 180 seconds go entirely silent and start again from a new IP with a new domain and so on, and keep moving from one to the other. This phenomenon has been around for quite a while, and as I said, it became much bigger with the availability of cloud resources. And that was a few years ago what basically pointed out our need internally, of course, to actually redo the entire infrastructure that we had been built over 15 years almost, in order to keep up with that. Because it was pretty clear that we could detect this stuff fairly quickly. But even though we could detect it and list it even immediately, the latencies that were involved in the entire process to bring that information out to the end user, the one running the mailbox server or having a mailbox on the mailbox server that needed to filter out this stuff was just too long. I mean, they ended up having the information 180 seconds the campaign was lasting for were already over. And that required a massive rewriting, not only of our backends, that was actually more or less the easy part, but also of all the ecosystem that our staff is leveraging to, because the main distribution mechanism for people in our industry has been mostly moving files around, where files are obviously the zone files. And that approach, no matter how fast you do it, is not able to go under, let's say, a minute or 30 seconds. And that's a lot of time when what you're trying to address is only going to last for 3 minutes. You're basically already losing 1/3 of the time just to make the information available. So we had to re-engineer the entire distribution architecture more than just the listing architecture. And that took quite a long time. I dare to say that we are pretty satisfied with the outcome so far. We managed to bring that down to a few seconds, and that allowed us to finally focus on the next steps, because it was pretty clear that the next step, that is exactly going beyond IP and domain reputation, was going to need us to also try to address the issues of people who are going to consume the data. Why is that? Well, because extracting URLs and domains from an email or IPs in the headers is relatively easy. But anything else beyond that is going to need some logic that is going to run on the analysis platform that is going to extract the tokens that you need that you want to get a reputation about, and normalize them to a certain degree in order to be able to ask the proper question to the infrastructure that is our part of the deal. And basically, this is how the entire thing came into play. I'll give that up to you to go with a few examples so we can actually address that in detail.
All right, thank you for the explanation, Skull. So the first thing that we're going to look at is email. So this is of course the concept of hash block lists has been something that has been around for some time. And we're definitely not the very first to do this. It's something that has been in the industry for a while. But first thing we're looking at here are emails. So we're just going to look at a garden variety couple of 419 emails. So essentially, 419 is the Nigerian termed scam. It's not specific just to Nigerians, but it's where this term, this 419 term, was assigned. But you were seeing this from all over the internet now, not just to pick on Nigeria. It's happening everywhere now. So when you look at 419 emails, this is something that you can block with your traditional IP and domain reputation. But if it's one of these things where the elements that you're looking at and blocking upon are related to these large consolidated email services, you're not going to be able to block this stuff, because it does more damage than it does harm. So we're looking at these two examples right here. So the first one that you're looking at top from Miss Karina has an Outlook.com mailbox included in the body of the email. So if you were looking at your domain reputation, you're not going to find Outlook.com being blocked within your domain reputation system, because again, it's going to cause more problems than it's going to cause alleviation of the pain that you may be encountering with somebody sending one of these 419 emails, including an Outlook.com address. And the next one that we're looking here, coming from Medway NHS Foundation Trust. Now, the NHS in here is related to the National Health Service of the UK. And the other piece that we can see in here is that the reply to in this message is going to a Gmail address. So again, looking at an NHS domain, I believe it's nhs.net. We're going to be looking at the header in just a moment, but can't block nhs.net because it's a legitimate service, and people probably want to be able to get their information from the National Health Service. And then next is looking at Gmail. You can't block the Gmail address. So looking a little bit more in depth, what we can see here is that you have this, of course, we redacted the name to protect the innocent. Unfortunately, what looks like happened here is that a legitimate mailbox that is an NHS user was compromised. So, it's one of these cases where potentially we could assign the reputation to that and put it into our email block list, but it's possible that that we wouldn't be able to do that just based off of the potential damage that could happen from it. But all of this is coming from NHS, as you can see from the header, where it's coming from and how it's flowing in. So this just makes that challenge, and using these email addresses in certain ways is the entire thing of why we wanted to build up this hash block list. So we're going to look into and get a little bit more of the technical information from Skull, and I'm going to send that over to him right now.
Yes, again, as you said from the very beginning, this is something that other people, including some of us at Spamhaus, have been doing for quite a long time, just not at Spamhaus. And the idea, the focus on filtering out these type of communications is exactly on what we call in the industry Dropbox accounts. And that they serve a purpose, and that is why they're there. They are the communication channel between the victim and the fraudster. And that is also why they're never going to disappear, because without that, the scammer would lose any incentive to send out this stuff, because nobody would ever be able to fall in their trap. As such, it is the ideal hook to attach a reputation to. And again, just as we said, that is something not really new. What you do in these cases is basically extract all the email addresses that are present in the message. In this case, in the reply to header, in the case of the NHS sample, and inside the body for the other sample, but it could be another header or other places. And you just normalize that email address, use it as the generator for a hash. So you use crypto hashing algorithm to generate a hash out of it, and then you just query the hash against DNSBL, just like you would for a domain or an IP. You do that with a hash. That is again, something relatively easy to do. The normalization part is not particularly hard to do here, but this is exactly what I was meaning, where I was referring to the need to also build the client implementation that would take care of extracting the information and building the query for the user on the consumer side. And that is why we have been building plugins and rule sets for Spam Assassin and RSpamD. Note a thing, I mean, 419 is the example here just because it is the typical fraud that you can think of that involves email accounts that are not related with the actual sending. But this is not necessarily the only sample that you can think of. Think, for example, of some ESPs that happen to have, despite all their effort, some rogue customer sending out through their infrastructure. Well, those can be a problem per se. And the reason for that is that many ESPs will replace all the links in the email message that their customer was sending out with links that are pointing back to their tracking infrastructure. And that means that when you receive the email, any useful information about what the original domain involved with that sending was already disappeared. You're receiving something that has no relation with the original message, basically. So the only hook that is remaining is the email sender, because that is usually not really removed. And I'm to the from header, of course, not the envelope one. But the from header can be pointing to a domain that can have an attached reputation. But if the domain is large enough, usually, or popular enough, like Gmail, again, that's not something that is going to help. You can, however, use that specific email account that is used for sending out the campaign as a reputational hook, and check if that is being listed by our implementation or of course by any other implementation compatible with it, and use that as a reputation hook to be able to filter out campaigns that are coming from an ESP without harming the ESP flow itself.
Awesome, thanks, Skull. So next we're going to be looking at an example of a crypto wallet. So this is probably, if you happen to have gotten email on the internet in the past couple of years, you may have seen one of these messages. It's something that the industry has started to define as sextortion. So sex extortion, and essentially what the thing is, the hook is here is the miscreant is trying to stoke fear into the user that they're sending into, to get them to go to their Bitcoin wallet or Monero wallet or whatever cryptocurrency that they are deciding to use at that time, and insert that in and try and make as much money as they possibly can. And for those who have been watching the news in the past 24 hours, we saw that there was a challenge that happened at Twitter with a bunch of accounts being hacked, and this is one thing that was an example in here that it may be something that in the future Hash Blocklists could be utilized for that type of abuse prevention. But back to the email at hand. So cryptocurrency is something that is widely used amongst miscreants out there. You see it in these sextortion messages. You've also seen it when ransomware was really, really big. It still hasn't disappeared, but they would you get that big red pop-up screen, and it would say, "Go and put money into this Bitcoin account." And well, it's easier for them to set up one of these cryptocurrency wallets than it is for them to go and set up a bank account, because there's just some challenges that you may have with a bank account. And of course, they're not going to ask somebody, here, put $20 into an envelope and mail it to this address. More or less, they're trying to make it as quick as possible for them to gain their money. So using cryptocurrency has been an avenue that we've seen in all sorts of messages and in other techniques that have been used. And again, with a lot of these, some of them are coming from those large providers out there. And that's not something that we can apply domain and IP reputation to. So when you're looking at this, the main thing that we can really make a decision on in terms of providing a reputation to one of these types of messages would be looking at that crypto wallet and being able to just assign that and say, okay, this element in this email is the reason why we are assigning a negative reputation to it. So Skull's going to give a little bit more regarding how we were able to build this out. So back over to Skull for a little bit of technical explanation.
Yes, this is actually an interesting example here. And the reason for that is that us building this list was not even to start blocking stuff or building a reputation list. As a matter of fact, this stuff has been around for quite a while. I would say more or less 3 years now. The entire email extortion using Bitcoin addresses or other crypto wallets. But initially, what we were observing is that the entirety of this stuff was coming from botnets, basically, and specifically one botnet. So it was not so much for being able to identify an additional hook for the reputation of the message, because we were able to identify the bot for what it is. But we started seeing that many of these wallets were going to be reused between sendings. So we started tracking them down, just to be able to see how profitable the entire sextortion campaign was. And it became clear quite quickly that using that as an additional reputation hook was worth doing, because that would have helped solving the issue of when one of these campaigns is actually coming through a compromised email account, something that ended up happening more in the future from that time we made that assessment. That is why we ended up providing this list to some of our users, our biggest users, to see if it was actually going to help them mitigate this type of campaign. And so this is way before HBL even became a thing. We ended up including this into HBL because, of course, the HBL nature makes this pretty easy, but it has been in use for quite some time at this point. And again, just like in the previous sample, but even more so here, this is where providing the proper implementation for the customers to run, for the users to run, is valuable. Identifying a crypto wallet account is relatively easy. They have a fixed length, they have a fixed structure, so you can look for that. Checking that a string that you extracted from the message is actually a valid crypto wallet address is a little bit more complicated. Normalization can be, for some crypto wallets, particularly complicated too. Then you have the hashing and the query. And of course, putting out an HBL component listing crypto wallets without providing all the code needed to consume it would have been, I wouldn't say a failure, but certainly not a huge success. And that is why we did this. We started publishing this only after we had the plugins for Spam Assassin and RSpamD available.
Thanks, Skull. So this is a little quote from one of the teams that we gave access to our crypto wallet list, and of course they say Hash crypto wallet block list. At one point we were wrestling with how are we going to come up with all of these billions of block lists, but finally came to the point of saying we're just going to use a hash block list and include all sorts of other things in it. So they tested this for 30 days. And they found that they were able to stop over 50,000 messages. And extortion, like all sorts of other challenges, is really a big customer concern. This was able to supplement the domain and IP reputation that they were already using, and just enhance that data and be able to give the customers a little bit of peace of mind that, okay, I know that IP and domain is taking care of a lot, but what about this stuff that isn't easily blocked? We were able to provide a little bit there with adding in the crypto wallet stuff. It was just one of these examples where this worked out pretty well for them. So now we're going to look at the last example that we have, and this is the files example. So with our files, we have both a malicious and both a suspicious category in here. When I'm done with this example, Skull's going to go a little bit into detail. The example that we're looking at right here has been identified as by us as a malicious file. So people may have seen these. We get them on a daily basis sent over to our salespeople and to our support and whatnot. Essentially, here's an invoice that I have attached to your email. Please click on it and open it, and then get owned. So essentially, what we have identified, this file in here is a macro-enabled Excel file coming from a botnet. That's trying to get somebody to open up an invoice. So the malware that's included in this Excel spreadsheet is TrickBot. So one thing that TrickBot does is it actually can do email harvesting. It can steal your crypto wallets. And it's also used as a banking Trojan and a credential stealer. So that's also another challenge that we see out here with malware, is that malware isn't just going into people's computers and doing one thing, like setting it up to be a proxy for a bot and just send out spam. It's doing multiple things now and providing multiple challenges against how somebody would remediate themselves if they were to download these types of things. So it's important that these types of things are identified and blocked as soon as they can possibly be blocked. So with all of that, we're gonna take another technical dive, and we're going to listen to Skull about some of the things that we've done and kind of how we thought about providing these files into our hash block list.
Yes, actually, this is a good example of where all of our effort into making things faster ended up paying as well. Because this was not so much about what we could do, but more about why we shouldn't do it. And if you are failing to follow me, let me explain this. Let's start from this attachment here. This is, as Matt pointed out, an Excel file containing macro. The macro is not the malware per se, it's just the downloader. So what it will do once it reaches your computer is downloading the actual malware that can, in this case, be TrickBot. And what we do with this stuff is basically, play them. We run them in sandboxing infrastructure. We do static and dynamic analysis on this type of files and the malware that they end up downloading. And this is something that we have been doing for a long, long time. This is how we extract the location for the command and control server that end up listed in the BCL and the SPL. So it's information, it's something we do to extract information we're going to use otherwise. The main point is, at that point, we do have a list of attachments that are actively being spread into email. And we also have, in many cases, knowledge about what type of malware campaign they are part of. But just like antivirus manufacturers out there, there is a problem in using this information as it is. This is what goes under our malicious type of attachment in the two data sets that are part of the file component of the HBL. Why is that? Well, because identifying that this attachment is actually indeed malicious and is going to install TrickBot on your computer is something that we can do only after the end of the analysis. And that is going to take minutes, in many cases, many minutes. Way too much for that information to be useful to block this stuff. However, the same fact that we are observing this attachment coming from a known spam bot, you see a spam bot sending you Excel attachments with macro enabled, it's not that giant a leap to understand that probably this file is at least suspicious, if not very probably malicious per se. So what we do is, at the same time that we decide that the file is suspicious enough to be fed to the sandbox infrastructure and do all the analysis that is going to trigger, we are also listing these files in the suspicious component of the HBL, so that we don't know exactly what it does, what it's going to do yet, but it is per se by nature, by what it is and how it reached us, suspicious enough to put out the flag, and within seconds allow our users to flag emails containing this specific attachment as at least suspicious, if not necessarily malicious per se. And that is particularly useful even though this is never, of course, and that's not our intention, going to be a replacement for anything related with antivirus and other types of protection. It's useful because what you are flagging against is just its nature and where it comes from, not what it does. And that means that you can do this for a campaign that is sending out a malware that is not yet known to the industry, because you don't need to do that in order to flag it as suspicious. I would say that is basically it.
Awesome. So, so one thing that we're tracking here is, some of this graph is looking at the detection boost with the HBL. I'm sure that Skull can speak a little bit more to this, but this is a graph. The numbers speak for themselves, and how we're doing this. And of course, we have not been publishing this list for that long of a time. So most of this is looking at a few months here. But Skull, do you have more that you could say about this overall graph?
Just pointing out what you are seeing. That is, as you may expect from the approach of the description I just gave about it, the file component, while useful from time to time, is certainly not going to be a particularly high component in terms of hits. What you are seeing in all those spikes is mostly 419, and particularly for the highest peaks, sextortion spam campaigns. So when they kick in, you can see that, for example, this is triggering mostly on sextortion or 419, that is obviously going through servers that are not blockable in another way. That usually means legit servers that happen to have one or more compromised accounts on them, and those are actually sending out this stuff. So about this graph, in case it's not clear, this is not what the HBL blocks. This is what the HBL is blocking and would not have been blocked by any other Zen or DBL component in our list. So this is all basically the advantage, let's say, of using HBL in addition to our traditional data sets. This graph is generated by a well-known industry standard spam flow, well, email flow, let's say, because it doesn't contain only spam. So it is easy to replicate for anybody who is consuming that same flow.
Awesome.
Oh, just a quick, sorry to interrupt, just a quick question. Could you just let people know what the units of the y-axis are, please?
Yeah, I suppose that is not clear. That's percentage. So let's say the peak on about 18th of May, that means that, exactly, that means that on that day, the HBL allowed to block 8 point, well, let's say 9% more take, or more or less, 9% more email than Zen and DBL alone.
Fantastic. So it's the percentage points above the detection you get if you were using Zen and DBL.
Correct.
Thanks, guys.
So, all right. So, last thing that we're going to be talking about here is, we've got emails, we have crypto wallets, and we have files. So, since the HBL is going to be something that we view as extensible, because there's a lot of content in emails and it's all variable and all changing all the time. Skull's going to talk a little bit about what we're looking at in the future, and trying to avoid some of the complexity, but being able to identify specific things. So so over to Skull to look a little bit into what are we doing in the future with the HBL.
That is a hard question to give an answer to. And the reason for that is basically that anything that can be tokenized and as such turned into a hash can go into the HBL. So the limit is really the fantasy and the complexity of the implementation rather than what you can do out of it. If you ask me, of course, the next obvious thing to do would be trying to tackle URLs. Of course, hashes and specifically crypto hashes are very rigid in their representation. And that means that you can only apply them to URLs if you have a strong structure in the URL. But there are some URLs out there, for example, shorteners or you said Dropbox or Gmail file sharing and stuff like that. They do have that type of structure that can be easily normalized and turned into a hash. So most likely we're going to go that way. We may end up doing more of that. Again, it depends where what we end up being able to do more than what can be done.
Okay, yeah, the URL thing definitely sticks out in the crowd there, and more or less it sounds like that we just need the biggest thing is just to make sure that when we are building these, that the data that we're including in there is actually going to be helpful and useful to block these malicious things. So with all of that, I'm going to go ahead and push this back over to Sarah, who is going to read us any questions or challenges that the participants may have. So over to Sarah.
Matt. Thank you. Okay, so first off the bat, somebody's asked, where should these hash block lists be used in the email security stack?
In as many places as you can fit. Point is, of course, you can extract, think, for example, of the email component. Of course, as we have seen, that applies to reply to, so like headers, or to sender header, or to the email body, or basically anywhere you can find an email account inside the message. That is not necessarily true only for the message body. It can also be true for the message envelope information, because of course the envelope sender is the sender as well, and then it is an email address. So that should be considered a valuable token for the HBL2. For the other data sets like files and crypto wallets, of course, they're going to appear in the body. One interesting thing about some of the cryptocurrency addresses in sextortion scams is that sometimes they also appear inside PDFs attached to the message, in addition, at least so far, to just being in the message itself. And that means that, sure, you can, of course, take the PDF, generate the hash for it, and query it against the file component of the HBL. But another thing that you can do is also parse the PDF, if it is parsable, and you have the ability to parse it, to also see if there are tokens in there to be extracted and checked against. It is not necessarily limited to the email body. It can be anything inside that message.
Thank you, Skull. That's great. One message from an English-speaking person who lives in an English-speaking country, and he's mentioned that obviously most malicious emails arrive using English in the message, but very often you can see from their grammar that they are scam emails. And he's just wondering if we find it helpful to use poor grammar patterns to identify malicious content. Skull, Matt? Anyone want to pick up on that?
Well, it's all within the realm of possibility, but it'd be very difficult to find something to be able to find a specific pattern in, because I mean, the second that they change a word, that hash is going to be null and void. So I mean, is it in the realm of possibility? You can always say that because, well, there's that's at least what programmers tell me, that it's all in the realm of possibility. But in terms of having that as a specific indicator that we would be able to use in our block list, I'm not sure if that's something we'd be able to do with a full degree of confidence.
No, I agree. And if you ask me, that poses its own challenges. Yes, to the human eye, it can be relatively easy to identify that type of pattern. And of course, we are living in the age of AI and machine learning. So sure, you can also instruct a system to recognize stuff like that. But if you think for a second, what you're actually going to track is the fact that it's not proper English. So how is that model going to react when you receive an email that is actually coming from somebody who has not a proper English grammar, for example, from myself? You're basically tracking on behavioral part that are part of the human being behind it. So you may end up with unintended consequences in terms of false positives due to that. It is certainly something that you can do and use as an additional data point when taking a decision.
Excellent. Thanks for that, guys. So another question. Do you have technical guidelines on how to extract and normalize the tokens?
Actually, yes. They are all, not only they're all shared and documented in our documentation platform that I'm pretty sure Sarah is going to provide you a link for at the end of the webinar. But also you can find an already available implementation inside the code for Spam Assassin and RSpamD. That is published on our GitHub page. And for that, I'm sure Sarah is going to provide you a link as well.
I am going to, absolutely, yes. And then one final question that's come in is this compatible with the Barracuda spam firewall?
Reality is I have no clue. I have no idea what they implemented in the last few years, so it may be the case. Certainly, it is available for them to implement because the specifications are out there. If you ask me whether they have something that does that already for similar lists, I don't have an idea.
Right, okay. Perhaps if anybody finds out, they could let us know. And just one final question, which has just popped in. Which part is more likely to have a suspicious email address, from header or envelope from, or message body? And what types of files are more likely to be suspicious? .docs, .pdfs, or other types?
My suggestion is check all of them.
Yeah. So yeah, when you're looking at email addresses, you want to, anywhere that an email address could exist. So your from header, envelope from, reply to, in the message body, that would be how you would want to tackle that. Now, where it's more likely, it could be anywhere where they decide to do it. We're identifying these in all sorts of pieces and messages. From the examples that we provided there, you saw that one of them was showing that the from was the problem, and then the other one had one in the body, and we've seen other ones where the reply to is the challenge. So it's essentially it's a well thought out. Just anywhere where the email address may appear is where you should likely be checking against that list.
Thank you.
And as a matter of fact, the same applies to file as well. Let me give you an example. It's not so popular anymore, but a few years ago, you had spammers sending out spam that was only containing an image, and all the text for the spam was actually inside the image. Now, they weren't going to change that image for every recipient, and that ended up as a result with large flows of several emails going to different recipients, all having exactly the same image attached. Now, this method is no longer particularly popular, but that is another good example of where something like the file component of the HBL can help. It is being sent by SpamBot. It is constant between several sendings. So it is something that you can use to filter out the message, even without having to bother into instructing an OCR into trying to parse what text is inside the image itself. You can just match the image per se.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry, there's still a couple more questions. They keep rolling in. How many different cryptocurrencies do we support, guys?
I think at the moment it's 5, but to be entirely honest, if you are going to write your own implementation and not rely on what we are releasing right now, my suggestion would be to focus on Bitcoin only. We have seen some Ethereal account out there. We have seen some Monero account, but 99.999% is Bitcoin. So go for the low-hanging fruit first. You can find the documentation and the code to do the rest if you want to.
Thanks, Gal. And another question, in terms of how to benefit from the HBL, is it possible to test it soon? We've got a question from an ESP who's sending hundreds of millions and starting to analyze a subset of that volume through a rspamd implementation to kick scammers, phishers, the sooner possible. Okay, so Simon, who's asked this question, is the pricing going to be the same as the other Spamhaus solutions? Well, I think I can answer that. So the pricing is the same as our content block lists. So that's our domain block lists. It's all included clarify, through that.
I just want to clarify, yes. When essentially it is included in with the content block lists.
Yeah, so that includes domain block list. That includes the domain block list and our zero reputation block list, and also the hash block list.
Yeah, and fortunately and unfortunately, there are no salespeople on this call. So if it's something that you want to explore a little bit, you can reach out to those folks. But it's something that you can test it now. It's available. It is ready. So it's something that we are definitely publishing now, and it can be used right now.
Another question coming up. Is HBL only usable via our data query service, or is there also the possibility to rsync the zone files as with the IP block lists?
It is available, but it's a little bit different in how we have it. We are not providing it in RBL DNSD format. I would love to put that over to Skull because he can talk a little bit more about it, because he was instrumental in getting that put into rsync.
Yes. So the big difference between the HBL and the other lists is that the HBL provides with multiple formats at the same time. For example, let's take the email component. It will provide you the same information available as SHA-1 and SHA-256. But when you're going to consume it, you're going to consume it only in the format that you're going to query for. So providing both, while doable, was not particularly performant from the distribution point of view. So we're sending them out, making them available in rsync as a single bundle. You have a file that contains both formats, and you do with them what you want to do. And the reason for that is that, as a matter of fact, most of our rsync users nowadays are not even using RBL SpamD in any case. They do import our data inside their platform using their own technology. So providing RBL DNSD format was not particularly going to be useful. And also, and this is a suggestion that I give to anyone who is still relying on rsync, all the effort that we put into providing information, making information readily available, the very same time we have it on our mirrors is not something that can be easily replicated on rsync users. It is possible, but it requires an amount of engineering work that needs to be taken by the customer itself, by the user itself. So unless you are one of the very few big giant providers that are in absolute need to consume the data locally, my suggestion is switch to DQS in any case. You're only going to see advantage in doing that.
Thanks very much, Skull. That's great. I think we're down to the very last question. So thank you everyone for your patience. A question saying this gentleman uses Spamhaus extensively and loves the absence of spam, hurrah. But with HBL, he has an issue. He uses Message Sniffer by Arm Research and was wondering if the HBL is a direct competitor to this or as a complement to.
Giving an answer to this question would require me to go and see what they actually do. I mean, as Matt said from the very beginning, none of this is really new to this industry. A lot of people have been using DNS like we do for storing the most various type of informations, and of course storing hashes is only one of the many things it can do, and of course it is being used as such by many people. Whether or not our implementation is compatible with there or does the same stuff, I have no idea, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's all of the questions answered, I hope. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and we've just about hit the hour mark. We will send through recording of this along with all of the items discussed, links to our GitHub and also the documentation and some further reading for you guys. Thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day and goodbye.
And stay safe.
Absolutely, stay safe.